Hello, friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. It is Laura Victoria Ward here with a micro movement and the developmental patterns session on. It's going to be pretty short because I've got to go somewhere pretty soon. But a live. I'm starting to do lives. Yay! I just want to let you know that the developmental patterns are something that I know through the Laban-Bartenieff work, more specifically for Bartenieff. And what they are, Irmgard Bartenieff, what they are is the patterning that humans go through when they're born. So it's the sort of neurological way that we come online to movement. Just moving back so you can see me. And I'll talk about them, I'll show them, and we can play with them. And this is an invitation for you to participate with me in this movement. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to name them all, and then we can go through them. So the first developmental pattern is breath support. Born out of the womb, what's the first thing you got to do to be alive and stay alive? Baby's got to breathe. Baby's got to take that breath into their lungs. So that first layer is breath support. In order to exist, we need to breathe. It's the one thing we have to do all the time. We may be able to hold our breath for maybe some extended period of time. So if we're a Pearl diver or something like that, or a Wim Hof studier, we may be good at some massive breath holds. And I've been doing Tim van der Vliet's breath, Tumo breathing stuff lately. So I'm working on my breath holds, but still, to be alive, we have to breathe. So first, most basic pattern is breath support. And from breath support, we start to develop a sense of core support. Things start to function together. So like our lungs, our heart, our organs are sort of in there massaging each other as we breathe. So that first layer of breath support is underlying every pattern that comes afterwards. But to move along, the next pattern is core distal. So babies start to, you see them when they're laying down, and when they're fresh babies, their senses are all very centered around sensation and body, right? They're not thinking, expostulating, pontificating yet. That's going to take a long time. So from their babiness, with their senses, even their vision is pretty near. Everything is in the near kinesphere for them. And what they start to do is develop this, we call it navel radiation. It's also core distal relationship. So an arm reaching out and coming back in, a foot, a toe. You see babies with their feet and toes and all the sort of dexterity that babies have compared to old people who've worn shoes their whole life, right? This is one reason why it's important for babies not to be bound up in shoes much. Let their feet have freedom. So their little digits, their little fingers and toes can have some movement. Also, there's the question of swaddling. A lot of people swaddle their babies so that they're not going to move, so that they stay calm. My mom didn't swaddle me, and I'm a mover for life. So just to throw that out there, people have different opinions about it. But if you want people to keep moving, you got to give them some opportunity to move. Another problem are the bucket seats, the little buckets where the babies are in there. And like, oh, the baby's so calm and quiet when it's not moving in its bucket seat. This is not healthy for developing human bodies for long term. Well, a little bit here and there, you got to go in the car, you're going to do something great, but not for long term stuff. So core distal, second pattern, center to periphery, radiating outward. Part of that is also like there are reflexes that babies have that are like rooting reflexes. Their face is looking for the boob, looking for the sustenance. So that is also, we could think of kind of core distal, but it's going to bring us to our next pattern, which is head tail. So the relationship of head to tail and movement from head to tail. So you see babies when they're trying to go to the bathroom, like there's all sorts of weird movement happening. That is a core distal or a head tail pattern. And that is when that patterning starts, when babies are doing their little internal adjustments, trying to make things happen, or just being babies, they're developing a lot of, again, core support through that. So that micro movement, we can do all of this stuff as adults. We can find our head-tail connection. We can find our core distal connection. And one thing that I've always liked to say is, if we were an alien and just came into our body, how would we move? If I was just discovering that I had fingers and toes, back to that core distal pattern, what can they do? What can my foot do? What's possible? And if I didn't stick it in shoes for all my life, how much dexterity would I have in my fingers and toes? Different cultures have sort of different relationships to the movement of their hands, the movement of their feet, how much imposition we put on our bodies or our our hands, our feet? How much in position do we put through our clothing and through the way that we live in our world? So first pattern, breath support. Second pattern, core distal, radiating out to the edge. And the distal is like the tips of our body. We could think of even our head and tail being like distal, but thinking out to the edge, your fingertips and toes, and then coming back in, radiating outward, bringing it in. That core distal pattern can be very asymmetrical. It's often not like, once we're more trained, we might do it symmetrically, but as babies, it's going to be happening in different ways. So playing with this center to edge is a great way to play with the core distal. And then coming in the next one, number 3, head tail connection, which if we look at different sort of movement things, if we're doing yoga, that's a head tail connection, right? Finding cat cow is a head tail connection. Arch and curl, if we're doing gyrokinesis, all of that arch and curl and gyro is head tail connection. It's rippling through, finding the river of our spine and giving it some mobility. And what can our spine do? It can do lateral flexion, which is going to bring us to, well, we're not there yet. I am talking a lot about these things, but we're still at head tail. So head tail, we can go like this. We can do this spiral. We can have a little lateral flexion, and then we can do it in multiple different ways. So with the micro movement, it's fun to allow your body to bubble up in its own interest, what feels good and delicious. Like, oh, if I shift my weight around, I can feel my sit bones, I can feel my belly squishing and moving, I can feel my rib cage, lungs, and heart, my diaphragm. And I'm in this head tail connection. I'm finding my upper versus lower relationship. And hopefully it's not something that I've cut off here, cut it off here, wherever people cut things off in their bodies. Sometimes we do that. Next pattern. So we've sort of established our baby head tail pattern. Our next pattern is upper versus lower. So upper versus lower, to the top, to the bottom. Or if I was standing, I mean, a baby's not standing, but for a human, just doing an upper versus lower pattern is upper versus lower. Oops, hello. I just got goosed by my my begonia. Like, what is that on my butt? It's my begonia. It's my big onia. Anyway, so we have our up and down. Anytime we're going just up and down, there's no side happening. I'm working with my upper lower. So I'll show you upper versus lower in a more baby way. Baby on the floor is going to be starting to hear some spinal relationship, and then maybe looking around, lifting the head. This is developing the extensors of the spine. This is an upper versus lower pattern. And then maybe they're going to start to push-pull. So push-pull patterning. And I can do that with my feet. This is a great exercise for sort of releasing, adding this push-pull pattern from lower to upper to upper to lower. Really, the push is happening in my feet. And I can feel that I'm a little bit rigid in my spine. If I soften a little bit more, maybe I can get more of a ripple going through there. So this is about relaxing and letting that movement ripple up and down. This is a push-pull pattern, upper versus lower, also known as homologous patterning. So my third pattern, I said I was going to go through them and then show them, but I'm doing it all. So that's what's happening. Next pattern is right versus left. That is rolling. Babies start to roll. Rolling will happen before they crawl. And often it's like the head could initiate. Oh, I'm looking. Oh, and now it takes me all the way to my other side. I'm looking. And that takes me to my other side. So that's one way. Or I'm pushing, and that pushes me over to the other side. I'm pushing away from one side, takes me to the other. So that is our right side versus left side in a seated position. Opening, one side, the other side, or reaching out. I can even working across a little bit. Once I start to cross my body, I'm developing the final pattern, which is contralateral patterning. Cross body, opposite, walking, running, lots of human things that we do. Even this kind of walk can be very shoulder, hip, shoulder, hip, shoulder, hip. This is a great thing to do to get your body moving. So that was pretty big movement with a lot of these patterns. Let's make it smaller and play with them. So coming in, you could be laying down, you could be seated. I'm going to do this seated so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to start with my breath support. I'm going to adjust my little outfit, my onesie. Now I'm thinking with my breath support that there's this whole sense of growing and shrinking going on in my body. Deep cellular breathing. The oxygen in my breath is moving through my whole body, nourishing. So it's very connected to my bloodstream, right? Finding that deep breath support. And if I want to micro move it or think about the micro movement in breath support, the breath support can go up and down. Side, side. Forward, backward. And in Laban, we would call that lengthening and shortening, widening and narrowing, bulging and hollowing. And we want to think of the bulging and hollowing going in two directions. So I'm not just bulging and hollowing like that. I'm getting deeper in the front and the back, and then sort of coming back in towards center. Hello, people who are on there. Nice to see some numbers of 2. Huge, huge numbers here. So finding that breath support. Now we can think of it not just up, down, side, side, forward, backward, but really in the diagonals. I can go in any of these diagonal places with my lungs. Like we're very 3-dimensional. And sometimes we think of ourselves we're predominantly vertical up and down if we're standing, with a little bit of side, side if we're reaching out. And some people are sort of flatter bodies and some people are more rounded, more tree trunk-like bodies. Think of breathing into all of that and imagining that you're like a ball, the whole ball expanding, reaching out, getting bigger as you inhale, and then the whole ball coming into itself. Now, sometimes when I'm breathing, it becomes almost stressful. I'm like, oh, this is too hard. So if it becomes stressful, just let go of the idea of it and trust that your body will breathe. And maybe feel into the sensations of breathing instead of forcing them into something or making them do something. Allow and listen. It's great to tune into your self-talk. And if you're finding that you're having a sort of negative mantra, I can't do this, or am I doing it right? This feels weird. This feels wrong. Pay attention to those things, but maybe drop away the judgments and just go, oh, if you're thinking this feels weird, why does it feel weird? What feels different about it? And the more specific we can get into sensation, the more we can sort of drop away the judgment. So if you have self-talk that's very judgmental, very connected to right and wrongness, maybe soften that a little bit and just be like, here I am. I'm just here. And it doesn't matter. There's not a good or bad about this. It's just being. If you have really positive self-talk, that might be worth cultivating. My self-talk is often pretty positive, and that makes me feel good. So I'm not going to say don't judge on the good side of things, because sometimes that's helpful. Then let's get into head, tail. Sorry, core distal. So with the core distal patterning, we might think of coming from center out to the edges, and like I am trying to just let my hands let my nervous system, it's almost like I have this little weird typewriter, but let it play out. So it's not like, oh, I'm doing this thing. It's more like I'm allowing this thing to happen. And for me, it's bringing my awareness out to the edge. If I bring my awareness out to the periphery, there's already a core distal thing happening because it's coming through my nervous system, right? Just tuning into that. You could have your hands on your lap, we'll just put it a little higher, and you could just like have a little play. It might be very slow. Maybe like, how small can you move? How micro can you make your micro movement? Enough that you can feel something moving, but it's not huge. And as you spend more and more time with micro movement, your nervous system will start to unwind a little bit and allow movement to happen without you having to make it happen. And I'm not talking about the sort of like self-soothing of my nervous system's doing this just because I can't deal. I'm talking about the more deliciousness of like, oh, this is actually unraveling and softening in a way that is nurturing, taking me really into my deep parasympathetic rest and digest, soothe, and settle state. Now, same thing with your feet. I'll just move this down a little bit. The micro movement with your feet could just be like just a little bit of toes, playing with what's possible, maybe some pulling and spreading, feeling into that. And as I am moving my feet around, I become very aware of the muscles in the front of my shin and in my calf. And in the ideal world, when we're doing this micro movement, it's not about working your muscles. It's about sort of softening and allowing the nervous system to come into harmony, to release some of the stuckness and holding patterns that you may have accumulated by being a human living your particular life. So it's really about coming into a more harmonious relationship. And not just yourself to yourself, also the systems within yourself. So a more coherent system. It means that your systems are working more efficiently. It sounds so mechanical, but they're working harmoniously together. Yeah, so that's a little bit of core distal. And I could also kind of let it go out and come back in a little bit, playing with that, sort of expanding, radiating outward and contracting. Often when I teach younger kids, I find that they have a hard time really reaching out or really extending, really lengthening out, because so much of their world is in this small amount of space, right? So much of the world is in their phone, or this is where we spend a lot of our time now. So how, like, if I have them raise their hand, like, it'll just be kind of like that. Like, how do I get that excitement and that full body participation to go all the way? That's also going to help our fascia really be able to do that. And we want that. We want to have the capacity to really go out, to really come in. Well, maybe we don't want that. I want that. And I also want to see that in the kids I'm working with, that there's this capacity to be in space, to take up space, to be expansive. So playing with just this simple navel radiation core distal pattern can help us find a way into space. Maybe it's not comfortable to be big right now. Maybe it feels better to keep coming in from the edge to the inward. And that's okay too. What we're trying to do is develop range so that we have options to go far, to come back in, to radiate out, to come into self. So the next pattern is head tail. You could take your hand, place it right down there on your tailbone. If you can find it right in sort of in your butt crack, reach your finger down there, have an intimate moment with yourself. And then head on top, letting yourself soften and wiggle. So sometimes I like to say, imagine that all your discs are like cushy marshmallows. Imagine that your cushy marshmallows, or the discs between your vertebrae, are really soft and really supported and really juicy. And as you're moving, they're just kind of squishing around. And thinking of the bones also as just denser versions like that. So there's more density in there, but they're not hard and rigid. There's still a fluidity to them. There's still, like, babies are so full of water. This is a weird thing to say, but if you drop one, it's supposedly they sort of bounce because they're not so brittle. That just makes no sense to me. I've heard that. It could be total bullshit. So take it with a grain of salt. But finding some resilience in your own spine, some sort of rebound and some bounce. How do we do that? We've got our underlying core support, our underlying breath support. We've played around with some core distal. I think the imagination is one of the best ways to get into this. And so, like, just imagining that your spine is this river, and that your cerebral spinal fluid, which is in there, protecting your brain and your nervous system, bolstering it, and also nourishing it. It's nourishing and taking away waste. So as it filters through your body, which it does 3 or 4 times a day, it's really bringing in life force. And as we allow small little movements in those cushy marshmallow discs, in our vertebra, and then in the surrounding tissue, as we're finding this head-tail connection, we're just enlivening it. And sometimes, like, we develop holding patterns, or we say no to things, or we start to shut things down because we're not ready for that kind of life. And sometimes that is skillful and what we need in the moment. So, what we want to do is just have choice. Like, is it wise to say yes? Is it wise to say no? Do I want to enter the fray? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Right. But when you can start to connect into feeling all of this little movement, your body has a lot of answers and you can start to be in relationship with that. So I'm going to leave it at that today and not do all of the rest of the 3 patterns, which would be push pull, right versus left, and then contralateral, because we kind of have included them in our spinal movement, or at least I have. Maybe you have. But we talked through them, we went through them once, and I have to be in another thing. So I want to say that on July 26th of 2021 at 6 p.m. EST, 11 p.m. UK time, or EDT, Eastern Daylight Time, 11 p.m. UK time, I will be leading a session with Embodiment Unlimited, which eventually I will put the link into the chat here, into the comments. On my session is on bringing play into your relationships and using play as a way to bond and deepen your capacity to engage with others, but also with yourself. Can we have some fun in here? And that is one of my super important things to do. So thank you for my 2 people that have shown up. Super grateful, and hope you have a good day. Cheers.